Tá indo. Tá indo. Ok, vambora. Deixa eu fechar a porta, só pra não se incomodar.
Ô mãe, depois você dá uma procuradinha, vê se você acha. Depois você dá uma procurada, vê se você acha. Depois você dá uma procuradinha, vê se você acha.
Ok. É isso. Eu só deixei isso aqui aberto, no caso, né? Sei lá. Por que eu não tô logado no World Map? Vamos deixar tudo pronto aqui. Que a gente vai usar. Cara, dá uma agonia não ter finalizado aquele curso. Isso. Vamos ver as últimas aulas do que ele tem de HTML e CSS. E aí a gente começa a tentar montar o nosso projeto do zero. E é isso. Tá, então deixa eu colocar aqui no vídeo. And I don't care, you don't, nobody knows, give you time and space, no, way, no. What's going on? Isso aqui. Nossa, não vejo a hora do meu PC voltar pra finalmente eu ter um pouco mais de velocidade pra fazer as coisas. É isso. Enquanto eu abro aqui. Aqui.
Welcome to the React full course.
Acho que demora muito, velho.
The profile picture. So if I scroll down, so this.
Provavelmente a gente vai querer ver só o conceito. A gente não vai querer realmente ver.
Now we're going to learn another position. Save it, and then it should show up here. We're going to start in the body again, and we're going to create two divs. Let's go into our HTML. We're going to add some classes so that we can target it with CSS. So class, let's menu.svg. What we see here. So we're going to do the same steps, click the, and we'll continue after we downloaded all the that we use this to match our and a little bit. So if we set left to 0 pixels, then the left side of our element will be on the left edge of our window. If we set left to 50 pixels, for example,
Nice, okay, perfect.
now we're going to learn CSS position. So position helps us do things like keep the header at the top of the page while we scroll. It also helps us keep the sidebar at the top of the page. And lastly, whenever we see an element on top of another element, that's using CSS position. For example, here the video time is on top of the thumbnail, the notification number is on top of the icon, and when I hover over this, we have a tooltip on top of the page. So CSS position adds another dimension to our page. So just like the previous lessons, we're going to create a new HTML file just to practice position. I'm going to go into my code editor, and we're going to create a new file, and let's put it right here beside the other ones. New file, let's call this position.html. Now, as always, we're going to start with the HTML structure. So we're going to have doc type at the top, and then an HTML element. Inside, we have a head element, and then we have a body element. Now we can right click and open with live server, and we're ready to begin. So first, let's add a title so that we know what this HTML file is for. Let's call this position practice. Save it, and then it should show up here. We're going to start in the body again, and we're going to create two divs. Let's call this div1 and another div2. And I'm just going to resize this a little bit so we can see it side by side. So just like before, we're going to use inline styles so that our CSS is close to our HTML code. I'm going to set a style, and then we're going to set this one to background-color and light blue. And we're going to set the height and the width to 200 pixels. So height 200 pixels and width 200 pixels. Next, we're going to set the second div to be the same size, but with background color light pink. So again, we set a style, and then we set a background-color of light pink, height of 200 pixels, and width of 200 pixels. So CSS position is just the position property. So let's go into our first div. I'm going to set the position property to static, and then save. So position static is the default position. It's the same thing as if you don't have this line at all. Now we're going to learn a second position property that allows us to stick an element to the top of the page like this while we scroll. And that is called position fixed. So we're going to create a new element at the top here. And let's call this our header. So we're going to learn how to create something that works like this. So for this div, we're going to set a style of background color, black, and a text color of white. And now we're going to learn how to stick this to the top of the page. So first of all, we need to be able to scroll. And right now, I don't have enough content to make the page scroll. So what I'll do is we'll go to the body here. We're going to set a style. And then inside the body, we're going to set a style of height and something really big, like 3000 pixels. So we just need to make sure that we're able to scroll this page. Next, we're going to make this header stick at the top. To do that, we're going to use the position property. And this time, we're going to set a position of fixed. Now, when I save it and I start scrolling, notice how the header element is sticking to the page when I scroll. So that's how we make it stick. So the first thing to note is that when we set position fixed like this, it doesn't take up space on the page anymore. So before we had this, and if I save it, so notice that it takes up the top of the page, and then these two divs appear below this header. But when we add position fixed, it no longer takes up that space at the top of the page, because it's sort of floating above the page now. So that's one way to think about it. So the position property has 4 special properties we can use to move this element around. The first one is called top. The way that top works is that we can set a pixel measurement. For example, if we set 0 pixels, this is going to make the top of our element 0 pixels from the top of our browser window here. So if I save it, notice that the top of our element is right on the top edge of the browser window. If I set top to 10 pixels, the top of our element is now 10 pixels from the top of the browser window. So top specifies how far away our element is from the top of the window. The next property we can set is left. So if we set left to 0 pixels, then the left side of our element will be on the left edge of our window. If we set left to 50 pixels, for example, now the left side of our element will be 50 pixels from the left of our window. So left tells us how much space is between the element and the left edge of the window. So we can set this in all 4 directions. We've seen top, left, we can also set bottom and right. Now, a special feature of these properties is that if we set it in opposite directions, the element will stretch. So for example, if we set it to left and right, so these two are opposite directions, and we set the right to 50 pixels, notice that the element stretches. So now this element is 50 pixels from the left of the page right here, and it is also 50 pixels from the right of the page. So it will stretch the element to meet these 2 conditions. Same thing with top and bottom. So if I set bottom to 100 pixels and save it, the element will stretch so that it is 10 pixels from the top and it is 100 pixels from the bottom. So this is how we move this element around and resize it with position fixed. Now let's try creating the header that we see here. So as you can see for this header, it's at the top edge of the page. It's also on the left edge and on the right edge. So that means that it's 0 pixels from the top. As a shorthand, we can just write 0. It's 0 pixels from the left and it's 0 pixels from the right. Now for the bottom, we might first try to calculate how far the bottom of this element is from the bottom of the page. Now that's not going to work if we resize the page, so we need a different approach. So first, let's save this file and go into our practice file. So now you can see that this element is sticking to the top, the left, and the right, which is what we have in our code. Now we have to figure out the height of this div. So in this case, instead of using bottom, because remember the bottom can resize, we want to use simply height. So in addition to these properties, we can simply use height and width to also resize this element. It all depends on what situation you're in. If you want this fixed element to resize with the page, then you would use top, left, right, and bottom. If you just want it to have a specific height or width, and you don't want it to resize, then you use height and width. So here we're going to set the height to 50 pixels, and we don't want it to resize with the page. So that's exactly what we have here. Now when we start scrolling, you'll notice that our header sticks to the top of the page. So that's how we create something like the YouTube header that we see here. Now one last problem is that if we go to our practice file, notice that if we scroll right to the top, the header is covering our first div. So we need to add some spacing at the top to push our content down below the header. To do that, we can go into our code, and the first thing you might think to do is to add margin to the top. So we're going to add spacing to the top. Now let's add a little more than 50 pixels, so 60 pixels. So if we save it, and make sure you scroll up all the way to the top of the page, you'll notice that we have 60 pixels of space at the top, and now our content is not covered by the header. Now this is not the best solution because there's a space at the top, and now our content is not covered by the header. Now this is not the best solution because if our content order changes, for example, if I move this div down here, notice that it doesn't work anymore. So what we want instead is to always have space at the top of our page, regardless of what the content is. So if I move this to the top here and remove margin top, I'm going to show you the proper way to do this. So to properly handle this situation, we need to add spacing to the body element. So let's scroll up to the body. So we have 2 choices for adding space to the top of our page. We can either use margin or we can use padding. Generally, the best practice is to use padding at the top. So we're just going to add spacing on the inside of our web page at the top of 60 pixels. Let's save it and scroll all the way up. And now we have plenty of space at the top of the page, and our header is not covering our contents. So now that we learned position fixed and how to move this element around and resize it, we're going to go into the project we were currently working on, and we're going to put our header and stick it to the top of the page. And then we're going to open the youtube.html file, which is our project, and I'll put it on the side so you guys can see it side by side. Position fixed. And remember to move this, we're going to use top, left, bottom, and right. So top, we want our header to stick to the top of the page. We're going to set that to 0. We want our header 0 pixels from the left, so on the left edge of the page, and also 0 pixels from the right. And finally, we're going to set a height. So we already have it up here. So let's save it and see how it looks. So the first thing we notice is that we lost our background color. Now, the only reason we had a background color was because if we didn't have position fixed, this header takes space on the page. And the page just happens to be white, so the header appears to be white. But now that it's floating above the page, we'll notice that it's actually transparent. So to add our background color again, we just need to set the background color property. So let's set this to white. Save it, and now we're back to where we were. Now if we go to our project and we start scrolling, save it, and now we're back to where we were. Now if we go to our project and we start scrolling, you'll notice that our header sticks to the top while we scroll. So that's exactly what we want. Next, we have this problem where the header is covering our content. So remember, the way to fix this is to add padding to the top of our body. We're going to go into our code, and we're going to go into this file, general.css. That's where we have styles for the body. And then we're going to set a padding dash top of maybe 60 pixels. Let's take a look. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's compare it to our design. Let's go to the top here and just compare it a little bit. I notice that our videos are appearing at a higher position than our design. So we're going to push them down a little more. Let's set this to maybe 80 pixels. Save it. So we push them down even more. And I think that looks close enough to our design. So the last thing I notice is that we're missing the border at the bottom of our header here. So let's go ahead and add that. So let's go back into our header CSS. We're going to add a border to the bottom. So we can actually add borders to one side at a time. We don't have to add borders to all 4 sides. To do that, we're going to set the same border properties we had before. So we're going to start with border width, but in the middle, we're going to tell it a direction. So we can tell it bottom. We can also tell it top, left, and right. So we have all these 4 directions. In this case, we want a border at the bottom. And we're going to set it to 1 pixels. And the other border properties are the same. So border style, it's going to be solid, but we only want it at the bottom. So it's going to be border bottom style. And then lastly, border dash bottom dash color. And let's set it to gray. And I'm going to pick a lighter shade of gray. So maybe right there. Save it. Let's compare it to our design. It looks like it's a little darker than what we have. Just going to adjust the color to match our design. It's not going to be perfect, but remember, you can always inspect the design and then make it perfect. Okay, so now if I compare it, I think that looks pretty close enough. And now if I scroll, you notice that the header is sticking to the top, which is exactly what we want. Next, we're going to learn how to create this sidebar. So the sidebar is just like the header, it sticks while we scroll. So this is another example of position fixed. We're going to go back to our practice file, and I'll resize my pages here. And I'm going to open position.html we were practicing with. And this time, below the header, we're going to create our sidebar. So let's create a div, and this div is going to be our sidebar. Now for the sidebar, let's set a style, and then inside, we're going to set a background color of green this time. So a background dash color, green, and a text color of white, so that it's easier to distinguish between all of these different elements. Next, we're going to stick the sidebar to our browser. So remember, to do that, we're going to use position fixed. So position fixed, then save it. And now when we scroll, you'll notice that the sidebar is sticking to our browser while we scroll. Lastly, we're going to put the sidebar in the right place using top, left, right, height, or width. So let's look at our sidebar in our design. We notice that the sidebar is sticking to the bottom, so we want bottom 0. It's sticking to the left, so we want left 0. And for the top, it's actually not reaching to the top of the page. Otherwise, it would cover up the header. So there's quite a difference between the sidebar here and the top of the page. So let's go back into our practice file and learn how to position that. Let's start with left. We want the sidebar to stick to the left side of the page, so we're going to say 0 pixels from the left. Save it. Now we want our sidebar to stick to the bottom of the page, so we're going to say bottom and 0 pixels from the bottom. And finally, we want it to be at the top of the page but not cover the header. So let's set the top to 50 pixels. Right, so it's going to meet right where the header ends. I'm going to set this to 50 pixels and then save. And finally, we want to set the width of the sidebar. So for the sidebar, we don't want it to resize with the page. So that's why we're going to use the width property instead of something like right. So let's go back into our practice file, and we're going to set the width to maybe 72 pixels. Save it, and that looks like what we have in our design. So that's perfect. Now we have the same problem again, where our fixed element is covering our content. So let's scroll back to the top. We're going to add padding to our body so that these elements are not covered by the sidebar. So in this case, we want extra space on the left side. So we're going to set padding dash left, and let's set it to 80 pixels, which is more than the sidebar's width of 72 pixels. So now if we save this, we have 80 pixels of padding on the left side of the page, and now the sidebar is not covering our content. So that's how we position a sidebar. Now we're going to create the sidebar in our project here. So let's go back into youtube.html. I'm going to resize my page so that we can see it better. I'm going to create a sidebar on the left. So let's go into our code of style. So if we scroll up to the top, we have CSS files for our header, for our videos. So it makes sense to split up our sidebar styles into their own file so that we organize our code better. We're going to go into our code editor and then go into the styles folder here. I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to call it sidebar.css. And I'm going to put it on the side like this. Next, we're going to load sidebar.css into our HTML. So we just have to do one of these again. Just going to copy them. And then instead of video.css, we're going to load sidebar.css. And now we're ready to style this sidebar that we just created. So let's target the sidebar class. And we're going to set position to fixed to make it stick. Now for the sidebar, we want it to be 0 pixels from the left of our browser. So let's set left to 0. And we also want it to stick to the bottom of our browser. So bottom to 0. And finally, we want it to stretch to the top, but we don't want it to cover our header. So let's set the top to whatever the height of our header is. So if we go to header.css, which is here, we can check the height of our header is 55 pixels. So we're going to go into our sidebar here, and we're going to get the sidebar to end 50 pixels or 55 pixels from the top. So let's set that to 55 pixels, save it. So remember, with position fixed, the element is no longer on the page anymore, and it doesn't have a background color. So we just have to set that again. Background dash color, I'm going to set it to white. Save it, and now we have our sidebar. The final thing is to make our sidebar as wide as our design, which is right here. So we're going to set the width to 72 pixels. Save it, and let's compare it to our design. And I think it's hard to see because it's white here and it's a little bit gray here, but I think that's close enough. Now the next problem we have is that the sidebar is covering our content. So as we learn, we're going to add some padding to the left to push our content over. So let's go into our general styles, so general.css, and we're going to style the body. We're going to add padding to the left of our body. And let's add padding of 80 pixels again. And now our sidebar is no longer covering our content because we added a bunch of padding to the left of our page. So that's how we use position fixed to create elements that stick to the page while we scroll, like our header and our sidebar. For now, here's some exercises that you can do on your own to get a better understanding of CSS position. Now we're going to learn another position property that we can use. Let's go into our position practice file, and the same in our code editor. We're going to open up position.html, and then close all of these files. I'm going to resize it so that we can see it better. So this time we're going to learn position absolute. Let's do an example to see how it works. So let's scroll down, and we're going to create a div below our sidebar.